My father was born on the west bank of the Missouri River, December 21st, 1926, in a tent. That's where the Little Shell, that's where the Indians lived, was along the riverbank at that time. That's where, unfortunately, that's where dumps were located. That's where the brick factory over there was located. They could do work cleaning bricks, or they'd go to dump and scrap metals and that type of stuff. And that's one of the things they did. But 2 years after my dad was born, in that same encampment, my great-grandfather, Clephas Jarvie, died of exposure.
She who captures 2 horses in battle, Thunder Woman, does good things for the Indians, Honor Woman, Sister Buckskin. These were all the names that Montana and Idaho Indian tribes gave to Sister Providencia Tolan, a powerhouse of a nun, part of the Sisters of Providence Order, who devoted her life to helping Native Americans living in poverty. She was adopted by the Blackfeet tribe, the Gros Ventres of the Fort Belknap Reservation, the Assiniboine tribe of the Fort Peck Reservation, the Crow tribe, and the Coeur d'Alene tribe in Idaho. The bulk of her work was in Great Falls, where Sister Providencia was a sociology professor at the then College of Great Falls for a quarter century, from 1949 to 1974. She felt it important that her students understand the real world, so she took them to Hill 57, Mount Royal, and Ware Mill Road, all communities on the northwest edge of Great Falls, where dozens of Indian families lived together in shacks that the winter winds whistled through. The archives of the Sisters of Providence contain a letter from one of her students around 1968, which says,
"Those of us who have been instructed by Sister Providencia, or who have seen her with her apron on rationing leftover food from the College of Great Falls cafeteria to her people, would insist that this nun is no illusion. This has been a love letter because for me, Sister Providencia is the College of Great Falls, and the College of Great Falls is Catholic education. And Catholic education considers the breadth and depth of man, roots its students in the history of civilization, concentrates on the individual, and, through positive reinforcement, drags from each student the best that he can give."
Sister Providencia leaned on members of the community to bring in food and clothing to help families who had nothing, and she helped the breadwinners from those communities hold on to their jobs. Scotty James, who was then editor of the Great Falls Tribune, remembers Sister Providencia asking him to contribute firewood to keep those families warm, then calling back to say that one resident needed a battery for his truck to be able to get to work, and would he mind contributing that too? She became a familiar figure in downtown Great Falls. Jack Albanese Jr. describes her constant movement in his words,
"From the hospital to the city jail, to the county jail, to the bars, to the lower south side, and to the west side, in search of and on behalf of human beings in need."
Okay, when I was probably a junior in college, I needed some miscellaneous credits to complete my minor, and my minor was sociology, and Sister Providencia was one of my instructors, and I believe she was also the head of the department. So I asked her how I could pick up some of these credits. So between her and I, we set up an independent study program, and part of it involved doing things up here, hauling wood, hauling water, things that she considered to be important to what her goals in life were. And this was a good way for her to get some of the more physical things accomplished. And I think for a final exam, I probably hauled a load of wood. But I just remember many trips up here, all hours of the day and night, any day of the week. If it was cold and there was a shortage of firewood, why, I knew what I'd be doing that day. When I was up here, of course, the typical housing was probably close to the size of a garage today. These people that lived up here, wasn't very fancy at all. It was just maybe an old boxcar, maybe a car, an automobile that had been made livable, shacks, just the bare essentials. That's all it was. These people had nothing. Many more dwellings than there are today, and closer together, smaller, kind of haphazard, scattered, basically in a group in this area, but a lot of them, just a lot of them, little tiny places. And if the Native American people had one person who was their 100% advocate in this area, she'd have to be the one.
And during that time, of course, Sister Providencia, I took a number of classes from her, and I got to know her fairly well. And Sister Prof, being who she was, being very active and always on the go and a little hyperactive, she, got her students involved in various projects. And one of the things Sister Providencia had been working on way before I came, and also continued after I left the college, of course, was working with the Native American people on Hill 57 and Mount Royal and the Wire Mill Hill, which were three of the major Native American settlements on the outskirts of Great Falls. She didn't hesitate to advocate for Native American people, and believe you me, they needed lots of advocacy at that time, because the conditions on Hill 57 and Mount Royal and generally in those three settlements was very deplorable. Sister Prof was very much involved in trying to get these people some of the medical and dental care they needed. She always had food that was distributed at the end of the day at the hospital, food that was left over, and Indian people could come to the back of the hospital and get some food. She was instrumental in getting some religion classes going on the hill, and most importantly, I think, she fought like a trooper to get clean water on Hill 57, which was extremely necessary.
One of Sister Providencia's key fights, and one of her greatest successes, was getting city water piped from Great Falls to Hill 57. Clean water reduced the health problem enormously, and it prevented the illnesses and deaths of Indian babies who were dehydrated. Children were critically important to Sister Providencia, and she worked with their parents in developing the proper skills to nurture them. She also took over an abandoned home, turned it into an impromptu school, and taught remedial English and religion classes there.
It was hard for our parents, it was hard for us, but they made it easy as they could for us. And like I said, my dad was taught that you had to go out and work in the white world, and that's what you have to prepare yourself for. So me, I was the oldest in the family. I had to set an example. To me, speaking the English language was important. It was hard for me to grow up and to see some of the guys that lived below us. They couldn't speak English very well. They spoke Korean. It was really hard to sit and watch them try to go to school and have people making fun of them, and seeing that they couldn't really participate because they couldn't speak well enough to do it.
Dr. Mert McCluskey, former head of Indian education for the Great Falls Public School District, was first hired at about the time Sister Providencia was leaving Great Falls in 1975. A member of the Blackfeet tribe, Dr. McCluskey took over the educational battles that Sister Providencia had begun. He remembers the difficulties Native American students faced, and he remembers that the system sometimes had to be prodded into caring for their plight.
The Great Falls School District offered me a job to come up with a plan to do something about this problem. And some of the problems were the high dropout rate. The dropout rate for a long time had been, oh my goodness, fairly close to 100% of the Indian kids were dropping out of school. The kids had to go to schools where they were not comfortable. I mean, in the school where they may not have been comfortable, it was hard for them to get there. Like Jay said, he had a hard time getting to school. People that were working with kids who were not aware of the problems or who wanted to do something about those problems. And so that was my responsibility. The school district needs to do something about it. So for a long time, they didn't do too much. And finally, they were reported to the Denver Office of Civil Rights. And the Office of Civil Rights said, look, to the school district, you need to do something about this problem. These parents are very concerned. Their kids are being discriminated against, and they also are not finishing school, et cetera, et cetera. What are you going to do about it? And if you don't do something about it, we're going to hold up your money. And that was kind of the magic word.
Sister Providencia was born in Butte to John Tolan and Alma DeChamp, but grew up in Washington State, where her parents moved when she was young. Her father was elected to serve 6 terms in Congress, and she became familiar with the political process in Washington, D.C., and used it effectively. In 1955, she persuaded the House Subcommittee on Indian Affairs, including Congressman James Haley and Lee Metcalf, to hold a hearing on Hill 57 at which residents testified about their living conditions. And in 1957, she addressed a joint session of the Senate and House of Representatives in the nation's capital on the Sisters of Providence in Montana and the Indian problems. She worked closely with the Montana congressional delegation, particularly Senator Mike Mansfield, to achieve reform.
She was all the time saying, hey, the conditions in these places are not right. These are off-reservation Indian people who do not have access to services as reservation Indians have. You've got to do something about it. You've got to do something about it. And she was always politically active. She tried to get delegations here to visit these places, and advocated on a very personal level with the Indian people, but also she tried to change the conditions itself. And I think that was one of the great things that she was able to transmit to me, that it isn't just helping people individually, you also have to change the underlying conditions.
Dr. Harms, County Medical Officer, has announced that 17 new cases of blood poisoning were discovered on Hill 57. He now estimates a total of 30 cases. One child has total vitamin deficiency. The health of the entire community will be fully impacted just 3 years from now. Signed, Sister Providencia.
Dear Sister, in regards to your telegram, I contacted Dr. G.D. Carlisle Thompson at the State Board of Health in Helena and have received the following wire from him. Several cases of lead poisoning on Hill 57 are due to the inhalation of fumes from burning old batteries. I'd be glad to furnish a full report when all of the information becomes available. Regards, Senator Mike Mansfield.
Sister Providencia Tolan was ahead of her time in fighting for the civil rights, individual dignities, and economic well-being of the impoverished Indians throughout Montana, and particularly in the Great Falls area. Her legacy may well be that she challenged the status quo thinking of the time and took off the blinders that prevented people from seeing that fellow human beings were being forced to live in less than human conditions. Although her legacy had been diminishing before UGF history and journalism student Mark Fee began to collect oral histories that have established her social importance, she still looms large in the memories of the tribes for whom she worked so hard. Edward Eagleman, one of the former leaders of the Chippewa Cree tribe on the Rocky Boys Reservation, described her, in his own words, as a fearless and eloquent sister and probably one of the best informed persons in the United States on the Indians' economic problems.
Most of the things that I had heard about anybody doing, working with Indian kids and families and so on, had Sister Providentia's name attached to it because she was very instrumental in doing things not only in the community but also at the college. And some of the early work that was done here for Indian families was done with her contribution or her participation and encouragement. And so that's why I think her name has been held quite high in the community with amongst, especially amongst Indian people and those that have worked with Indian people.